Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite comic book heroes along with Batman and not Superman. He's bad. There's just something about his corny grins, his memorable lines, and his interesting villains that make him so much fun to watch. Maybe that's why he's had a billion different movies, especially in the last decade or so. Some of these films have been able to capture the essence of what made this character good for so long, and some of them have not. But that doesn't mean I didn't like those films. I mean, the fun part about having so many different Spider-Man tones, characters, and scripts is that there's something for everyone. I would say that I like at least one film from each Spider-Man version from the last 20 years, but I definitely have my favorite trilogies too. There isn't a hard and fast rule, but in general, I would say I like the corny ones more than the realistic ones. This list in particular really made me question whether the movie was good or whether I like it, so I ended up making this list my favorites rather than the objective best. Though if you want to see that from worst to best, it'll be in the description.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, wealth and fame, he's ignored, action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day, wherever there's a hang, you'll find the Spider-Man.
Amazing Spider-Man 2 is so bad. I knew everyone hated this movie before I saw it, but I really liked the first one, so I thought I might like this one. Turns out I was wrong. I mean, there's some good stuff. The characters, Gwen and Peter, you know, they're cute in some scenes. Electro's powers are kind of cool sometimes in a few scenes. Alright, enough complimenting. The writing is so terrible, it's actually kind of amazing. Every single new character is blander than uncooked rice. Electro's motivation for being a villain is so idiotic it makes me physically mad. Basically, he gets saved by Spider-Man, so Picture of Spider-Man becomes his best friend in the entire world. Then he gets superpowers and gets mad that Spider-Man would dare to forget the 30-second long conversation they had. But I mean, I guess it makes sense that Electro would get mad at Spidey. I mean, he did set him up so that he could have his big hero moment in front of these people, even though in that same scene, Peter literally says not to shoot Max.
You guys, this is my buddy Max. I told you about Max. No one shoots at Max!
Either I'm going insane from this movie, or Max's motivations make no logical sense and the writer just wanted a villain that Spider-Man could fight without considering logic. And like, okay, I could kind of forgive these foggy motivations if the villain was at least good, but Max is one of the most bland villains you can possibly make in a superhero movie. He basically has the power of electricity and can zap people. He is not a person. He is the trying to be intimidating Steppenwolf from Justice League. He is the hilariously stupid Ronin from Guardians of the Galaxy. And this fact becomes even more apparent when Max goes from meek little guy who doesn't want to hurt anyone to a bloodthirsty animal. And you could say that Max has all this built up anger and that's why he pushed it back, and yeah, you would kind of be right. But that still doesn't mean his transition has to go from 0 to 100. Next is the Green Goblin, who's probably the second worst villain on this list. Guess who the first one is? Look at his design. How did this get approved? This movie also can't pick a tone to save its life. Like, towards the end, Gwen Stacy died and I thought, wow, this is actually a really good idea. And it was! But then this happened. Please look at her back flipping and tell me you don't want to laugh. I mean, Jesus, you can't even give me one good scene? I thought the point of these two movies is that they're serious and include epic moments. This movie has Electro playing the Itsy Bitsy Spider during an intense final battle, Electro saying, "It's my birthday, time to blow up my candles" during an intense New York scene, Electro just being a bad guy in general, and oh yeah, Green Goblin's design. Every line of dialogue in this movie is painful. Every moment that isn't explicitly Peter and Gwen is boring and forgettable. God, this movie's just uncomfortably bad. It doesn't have anything that draws me in, and it has a ton dragging it down. Unlike every other Spider-Man movie on this list, I feel like The Amazing Spider-Man doesn't capture a fun energy remotely, or has serious and intense moments. It is just bad.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, wealth and fame, he's ignored, action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day, wherever there's a hang, you'll find the Spider-Man.
Alright, this next spot is definitely gonna split hairs with a bunch of people, but I think it's good to share your opinion. Spider-Man Homecoming is a film I've never really loved. I don't know, for all the praise this movie gets for being such a great origin story, I really don't think it lives up to the hype. The Spider-Man origin stories are usually on the weaker side for me, with exceptions, and this one always felt the most forgettable. Vulture is an easy highlight as a very good, but not top tier MCU villain, and Tom Holland's performance is amazing, but aside from those two things, I don't really remember much. So much of this movie plays into a Spider-Man formula everyone already knows, and unlike The Amazing Spider-Man, it doesn't do enough different for me to like it more than the others. We've seen Spider-Man struggle between his Spider-Man life and his home life in better films. We've seen Spider-Man saving civilians and being revered as a hero. We've seen Spider-Man be a nerd. Many of the other origin Spider-Man's greatest strengths was looking at concepts shown in the previous works and either changing it or improving it. Spider-Verse added way more compelling side characters despite playing into the gets bit by a spider and his uncle dies trope. The Amazing Spider-Man improved various small things that made Spider-Man look like a much more interesting threat, despite the Flash still being a bully. Spider-Man 1 created a comic book goofy charm despite having the most conventional story beats out of any of these films. Don't get me wrong, Homecoming can't be called a bad movie. It does do all of these concepts conventionally, but at least they're not poorly implemented. It's just kind of forgettable when comparing it to much better Spider-Man movies we've seen in the past. Still, it's a fun ride.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find the Spider-Man.
Even though I love the Raimi trilogy, the first one is probably the weakest for me. I know a ton of people love this movie way more than Spider-Man 3, Far From Home, and The Amazing Spider-Man, and while I disagree, I also get why people like this movie more. Like I said, the tone is undeniably different and special. I can't explain it other than saying it feels so stupidly cheesy. Like, imagine a stupid movie, but good. I love all of the acting here, especially Tobey Maguire. In all honesty, this is my favorite Spider-Man actor, don't at me. I don't know, he just gives me goofy, likable Peter Parker vibes that I fall in love with in every movie, especially this one. Otherwise, I can't call this a fantastic movie. Again, it doesn't really do enough different for me to get extremely invested. MJ is easily the worst MJ that we've gotten since she's bland, forgettable, and has barely any dimension until the second one gave her a few table crumbs. The Green Goblin is entertaining as hell, but ultimately isn't in the movie enough. And yeah, the rest is just standard. Not bad, as an adaptation, the Raimi films are kind of brilliant for capturing the inside of a comic book better than any movie on this list. At least in terms of tone, okay, calm down. But it's too simple to leave a strong lasting impact. I mean, come on, you seriously expect me to you seriously expect me to accept a conventional origins? Come on, you seriously expect me to accept a conventional story adaptation for one of the most meme-worthy...
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find the Spider-Man.
You know, even after all of these decades and decades and decades after 2019, when Spider-Man Far From Home came out, I still really like it. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is just so much better here than he is in Homecoming. The writers of this movie handled Peter Parker's source material with such care. They took the time to consider where Peter is in the MCU timeline and imagine what sort of difficulties he might have. Yeah, that happened in Homecoming, but I don't care, this is better. This movie takes place right after Endgame, which heavily focused on how the group dealt with the ramifications of Thanos' snap. Not so much individual characters though. Of course, there are scenes where the original five discuss it, but Endgame in my opinion felt a lot more like a grand conclusion to this franchise, rather than a conclusion to Infinity War, if you know what I mean. Far From Home sees how Peter Parker has dealt with all of this madness as a high school kid. He's burnt out. He is tired. He needs a break from all the space fighting. Which, I mean, of course he does. This is literally the worst time to be exhausted from battle though. because Iron Man's shoes need to be filled after his insignificant and barely even memorable death. The constant opposition from Nick Fury pushing Peter to step up, and Peter wanting to date Zendaya is what makes the movie. There's a really great lesson here about taking responsibility versus doing what you want, and neither side is completely right in the end. Peter does end up kissing MJ, but he does so by stepping up with Happy. What's most impressive is how the plot of this movie gives us a different take on the "with great powers comes great responsibility" line, while not explicitly telling it to us. It's just interwoven in the plot so that we experience the lesson without the cringy line everyone on the planet knows. Plus, this theme is helped by the fact that these characters are just so amazing. MJ and Peter are like the world's cutest couple ever. These actors are so good together, and as such, any scene with them instantly turns great. The romance is about 10 times better than Homecoming, it's decided. Nick Fury is also the best he's ever seen. He's really intimidating and fun to watch, yet this time he has an important plot relevance, since he represents stepping up against danger for Peter. Also, I love the villain top 5 MCU, sorry not sorry. This film falls a bit short with some of the pacing issues, and that scene that everyone hates is genuinely really stupid. But those are kind of minor issues at the end of the day. I love this movie.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Welcome fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find a Spider-Man.
Spider-Man 3 is pretty much the movie I was talking about when I said that this list would be ranked by my favorites. Don't get me wrong, there are a ton of things I love about this movie objectively, but it's just such a goofy ride. Even if the first half is pretty formulaic Spider-Man stuff, it's not really that great or entertaining, it's just your conventional superhero start. Harry is looking to be the main villain after the last movie, Mary Jane is on Broadway, Peter's still a dork, and the relationship problems are still bad, and I hate them. Eddie Brock is standard, the superhero stuff is just kinda boring. I think Spider-Man 3 for the first half is too grounded and not really compelling, kinda like Spider-Man 1. But to give this movie credit, the last half of Peter being in the spider suit is just amazing. He's just a stupid jerk that suppresses all the negativity he's felt with the death of his uncle, Harry and Mary Jane, and just fuels it into a meme. This character is the culmination of Spider-Man's meminess, and watching it be portrayed while this iconic song plays is just incredible. And yet, for as fun as this portion is, the movie is also shockingly down to earth and emotional, something I've never seen any reviewer talk about. I love how the grief and torment he's experienced in his life recently, combined with the symbiote, is enough to send him down a spiral of hate and jealousy. Yes, he does this, but he also pushes Mary Jane to the floor, kisses Gwen Stacy, and generally has a much more evil personality. There actually is some compelling drama there. I also like Eddie Brock as the stupid campy villain. I genuinely can't tell if Sam Raimi told him to act campy and have deliberate bad acting or not, but it worked. The spider venom affected them both in dramatically different ways. One of them turned into a monster who didn't care about the consequences of their actions, and the other turned to venom.
Like a turd in the wind.
And then you have the best scene in the entire Raimi trilogy, the bar scene. This scene is exactly the type of drama Spider-Man 3 showcased, and it's probably the best example of the movie knowing what it wanted to do, just taking a little long to show it to us. Peter comes in with such compelling cockiness, completely throwing away any kind of attributes he had before. This scene is so excellent because everything Peter does is not only hilarious, but also layered and interesting. Peter upstages MJ with smooth jazz, hilarious, but also shows just how bitter he is towards his ex. I mean, MJ has literally just been fired from Broadway, kidnapped by Harry, and blackmailed, and then completely ghosted by Peter, and he has the nerve to upstage her while she's being hired for a job. Peter starts dancing with Gwen. Hilarious, but it also shows Peter's tendency to not really think things through when he immediately regrets what he's done. He's kind of become a puppet, letting the symbiote dangerously enhance his toxic traits. Seriously, this movie had the potential to be in the top 3 Spider-Mans, but as is, I'm still perfectly content with cherishing this second half.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Welcome fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find a Spider-Man.
When I set out to rewatch all of these Spider-Man movies, definitely the one I was the most interested in rewatching was The Amazing Spider-Man. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I knew a lot of people didn't like it, but I don't know, it just really clicked with me. What I appreciate most about this movie is that it takes elements that were not problems, but not perfect aspects of previous Spider-Man movies, and improves them. That's just impressive. The webs especially showcase just how above and beyond this movie went. They feel much stronger than usual, but they don't undermine the threat, because his webs end up being kind of useless against a lizard scientist. What's he gonna do, blind him for a few seconds before being smacked in his face with a giant lizard palm? That's dumb. Another thing that was really improved was the action choreography. Peter Parker moves like a spider in all his action scenes somehow, and it reminds you that he's technically a spider-human hybrid. That's kinda lost in a lot of these Spider-Man movies, because nothing about Tom Holland or Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man screams spider. They just shoot webs. It's front and center here because it's delivered in the action, and the cinematography makes it that much easier to recognize. Another thing about this Spider-Man compared to others is that Peter Parker's intelligence is used in the action as well as the story. In other Spider-Man movies, they always focus on Spider-Man's intelligence to drive the plot forward, but they don't really use it in the action. There's no scene where Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man uses his knowledge to outsmart the bad guy. There's just scenes of him learning and being in class. Here, Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy work together to heal this lizard guy by finding a cure together in an amazing final battle. That's honestly one of my personal favorites. Which, by the way, is another thing that this movie does well, showcasing other characters besides Spider-Man. Obviously, it doesn't make sense for Gwen Stacy to attack the lizard, so making her intelligence on display was a really good choice. Certainly no other sequel to this movie included her being in the action, which is what led to her death, because that would be really, really stupid. But besides improving elements of other Spider-Man movies, this film has great characters, a pretty original origin story, and a fantastic soundtrack that makes it a very distinct experience compared to every other Spider-Man movie ever made. It definitely has its problems. I mean, it's surprisingly grounded and serious, making it a little less fun, and the tone switches constantly, but it's probably the best made Spider-Man movie and an excellent addition to his roster of films. Honestly, I'm shocked at how much I love this movie. Too bad the sequel was terrible.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Welcome fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find a Spider-Man.
The Raimi trilogy has always been praised to no end, and for very good reasons. I hate to say it, but unlike the MCU, these films have a goofy, fun charm that makes their movies just fun to watch. The MCU tends to have laugh-out-loud jokes, rather than an entire atmosphere, and I think it's a lot more impressive for your film to have a distinct feeling than to have one-off jokes that make your movies funnier. Not saying these jokes aren't fun, but Spider-Man 2 embraces goofiness a lot better than any MCU movie. There's so many distinct lines that everyone remembers even if you've only seen this movie a couple times, because the lines have a distinct goofy charm. Like this guy. You know who that is? Of course you do. I truly believe that this is because Sam Raimi did an excellent job making this film feel like a comic book, due mostly to the masterful score, the very corny villains, and how everyone, besides a select few, play their roles with such expression that it feels like their lines are encased with a speech bubble. This charm makes for one of the most corny, memeable, and overall funniest tones in any comic book movie. But that's how I would describe all three of the Raimi movies. So, what makes this one so much better than the rest? It's kind of hard to explain, but I think it's just the sophistication behind it. This movie honestly feels the most mature out of anything on this list because it's made with such care. The characters are legitimately perfect. MJ, Uncle Ben, and Aunt May give so much life to every scene they're in because they're so distinct from each other as Peter's confidants. MJ and Peter have a complicated history. Their conversations consist of MJ being reasonably upset at Peter that he never makes time for her, and Peter not being able to defend himself without revealing his secret. It's so frustrating to see because we know Peter has a viable excuse, but he can't say it because that would put her in danger, because he's just that selfless. Uncle Ben's conversation is also just as great, because it explicitly shows the fact that Peter is a human. He is breaking. He can't deal with the pressure of being Spider-Man all the time. Aunt May is also a fantastic addition. I know I haven't talked about her yet, but she is an absolutely fantastic emotional core for each film. This one especially. The performance alone is enough, but when you write her to be this wise, kind, and generous, it manages to make the film feel even more emotionally powerful. Each of these characters contribute to a different introspective dilemma happening inside Peter. The best superhero movies, in my opinion, are the ones that dive into the characters' inner thoughts. Think the Guardian of the Galaxy movies, Winter Soldier, or Far From Home. These movies focus on one or more character battling internal struggles of their own. The Guardians deal with being good people versus being assholes. Captain America deals with being frozen for so many years. And Tom Holland Peter Parker deals with the aftermath of Thanos. In this movie, Peter is dealing with being burnt out as he consoles with the people he loves. And while I do enjoy almost every Spider-Man movie, almost, one of them more than this one, the emotional core is stronger than all of them. I feel like this movie needs its own video, but honestly, everyone already knows this is one of the best comic book movies of all time. It's just honestly perfect. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Obviously, I'm stunned at how near perfect this next level film is able to be. The characters, the setting, the action, every single aspect is done incredibly well. And yeah, let's talk about those characters. These are some of the most creative, funny, and relatable renditions of Spider-Man I've ever seen. Penny Parker is fun, over the top, and very much feels like she came straight out of an anime. However, her robot's death scene still packs a punch because these characters are just so likable, even the one that gets the least amount of screen time. Spider-Noir exemplifies the original style of movies so well that his lines become a joy to listen to.
I like to drink egg creams and I like to fight Nazis. A lot.
He's definitely the fan favorite. Gwanda feels graceful and elegant, yet she still delivers a punch when need be. Even Peter Porker, who I was a bit underwhelmed by on my first viewing, still has his lines, though he is my least favorite of the four, I'm gonna be honest. I was really worried that each of the Spider People would make this movie feel like it had 4 different tones, but the Spider People are still able to be unique and similar to one another and still work in this world. The two Peter Parkers have an incredible contrast, as one feels like the Spider-Man we all know with his charm and his quippy lines, while the other is the Peter Parker no one's ever seen. While he does somewhat resemble the Peter Parker we know and love, he also seems tired of the job. Snarky and even a bit rude, but still likable. Miles feels different. He's a lot more socially capable and calmer than Peter Parker, but he still doesn't react to change well, just like him. Of course the villains are amazing, but my favorite has to go to Kingpin. His design is comically large, and unlike a lot of people, I actually like that they made it so big. I thought it was a really neat visual, and I think it's pretty menacing at the same time. I mean, his mere presence brings dread, and I think that has to do with the fact that he kills one of the main characters with his bare hands. I was really worried that his whole "my family hates me" complex would be the edge that the heroes needed to beat him, but fortunately Miles beats him through his own power. And oh yeah, Peter Parker dies in this movie. It's not a fake out. Peter Parker's ghost doesn't rise from the dead and gives Miles advice. He's really dead, and the rest of the movie focuses heavily on his death. Dr. Olivia Octavius is quite a different take on a villain, as she feels a lot more condescending than intimidating. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, we have our fun factor from her, and our scared factor from him, so I don't mind it. Besides, it's not like she's not intimidating. And I don't even know if you've noticed, but I went this entire review without even mentioning the animation, because that is not what this entire movie is about. With that being said, the animation is the next step animated movies didn't know they needed. Now, is this movie overhyped? Well, a little bit. I feel like this movie is just getting an insane level of recommendations that people might be expecting a little too much, but I feel like as long as you go in expecting it to be a movie, like don't expect a life-changing experience, I think you'll be fine. Just watch it, and then you'll realize why no Spider-Man movie could have taken this #1 spot. Now that this exists, I might have to give Sony a chance. Oh, that's right, they made all this hot garbage. Oh, and Arthur Christmas? Alright, open season, just you, me, and my childhood. Let's go.